Hello everyone, welcome back to the Filfarkov Academy of Linguistic Analysis, and today we're going to be having a look at progressive left-leaning newspapers from three different countries in a follow-up to our last video where we looked at some right-leaning or conservative ones. So just to quickly review what happened with the right-leaning conservative ones. We had these two scores that you can hear. Conservative in England, it was a plus 30, so quite strong emotionally. And then the US, which is Fox News, was just crazy at plus 80. And then Australia, if I remember correctly, that day was 0. So Australia was 0. So we ranged from like really, really strong in the 80 for the Fox, 30 in the English one. I can't remember the name of it, that newspaper. And then Sydney, the Sydney Morning Herald, which might not be right-leaning. Sorry, guys, I'm being a real philologist with this one. Very careful. But that was a 0. Okay, but you can see it varies quite a lot. And today we're going to have a look at three progressive newspapers. And it should be interesting. Like, first of all, will the equivalent... We're not going to look at an English one. We're going to look at a Canadian one, which is not there. Canada's not there. Oh, no, it is there. Okay, cool. So it was higher or lower before. I didn't have a close look. We'll have a look at the Canadian one. We'll have a look at the US CNN again. Last time was 55 when we looked at the US left and right. And we'll have a look at Canadian, US, and English, minus 20. So let's kick off with the American CNN. Okay, so we can see here we're talking about Russia, Ukraine, which is dominating here with the first picture. You've got a war scene. You've got like a happy-looking family, Ukrainian American, Hungary, Shanghai. So we can see it's reasonably dominant. The Fox News one we looked at last time, the right-leaning one, it was just absolutely everywhere. But the time before it wasn't there at all. So it's kind of swimming big time. We scroll down a bit, and you'll see that it does actually go off as you go a bit further down. But let's zoom in on the main picture, which is to the left, and give that a rating according to us. So straight away you can see it's horrible, really. You've got some cars on fire. 1, 2, it looks to be a third car on fire there, and debris everywhere with the bombed out building. But the fence is still intact, which is quite interesting. You see the fence is up there, that's intact. The light ones are still standing. And there doesn't look to be a centralized area, really. Like, what you should get when you have a really bad explosion, from what I understand, I don't know, I'm not an expert, like let's say this was the center of the explosion, everything that's around it, if it's really, really bad, will just be charred land. And you can kind of see it there. But then you've got nothing here, and then something else there. It seems to be quite random. This building's still standing, whereas that seems to have been flattened. But I'm not an expert on rocket or bomb damage, so I can't really comment on that. But I can give it a score according to our system. And there it is, our Filfarkov philological rating system. To the left here, you can see 0 neutral informational. It's scientific, just like we've got Tesla. Here, I don't know, I think I should replace that. It's quite sad, really. You're feeling a little bit sad. It's emotional. We give it a 5. If it's reptilian, making you crazy, angrily crazy, or sadly crazy, then we give it a 10. So coming back to our picture, unfortunately, I've put purple things everywhere. But without those purple things, yeah, it's quite nasty for me, really. It's like really sad. So I'll give it like an 8 or something. I'll give it quite a high mark, 8. I don't know, perhaps to you the fact that you've got that car there that's still completely intact. Yeah, you know, you might not give it an 8. I don't know, you might give it a 10. Like, does it make you feel really, really angry? Does it just kind of make you feel a bit sad, and then you start reading the next one? But I'm going to give it an 8. Then we have a look at the title that goes with it. Donbass Assault Begins. So Donbass Assault begins as Ukrainians make last stand in Mariupol. Interesting enough, when talking about negativity, there is no word Russia there. But from the context, it's quite clear. But, you know, Russians begin Donbass Assault threatening civilians. It could be worse. Assault begins. Oh, I'm going to give it a 5. I don't think it's as reptilian as the other ones. Would you do that? Would you give it a 5? Or would you give it something a little bit stronger? Nice, you know, assault, that's probably worse than attack. Make last stand, you know, yeah, I don't know, have a think about it, it's quite interesting. And then you got the caption below. I don't know what to do about the caption. Ukraine says Russia says is projecting, which is always good in a newspaper. You know, you're projecting. This is what someone says or reports. Have begun a massive assault. So it's not barbaric. If you remember, I think it was Fox News, like a barbaric assault. Massive is bad as well. While video appears to show. Wow, CNN. This looks like a newspaper. Well done, guys. Keep going. Keep up the good work. Civilians holed up in Mariupol. So it's all quite negative. I think that goes with the 5 there. You might give it a higher one, but I'm going to give it that one there. We add them together, 13, multiply it by 5, and that gives us 50, 65. 65 for the picture and text together. And then we look at the surrounding stories. So if we zoom out again, the surrounding stories, which are about the Ukraine, so we can add them, the average of them. So Ukrainian-American woman's family were forced to flee. She smuggled them to Poland. So that's quite a good bit of news, you know. And it should off the picture there's very positive, you know, like she's incredibly happy. This one here is not that happy. This one here, yeah, it's kind of like Ukrainian-American woman. My only guess is that's the Ukrainian-American woman, because she just seems to be radiating happiness. Whereas, like, sorry guys, we've got like the, you know, Eastern Bloc, you know, very stern Soviet face. I mean, sorry, I shouldn't laugh. You know, these people are refugees, but they do kind of look a lot more Soviet than the woman in the middle. So again, guys, this is a war. You know, like if you're emotionally involved with this, it's probably not a good idea to watch these videos. Go and watch something else. Go and do something else, because we are linguistically analyzing. We do think about our schemata, like what we think about life. And you may think what I just said about Soviet people is quite racist. I think it's okay by YouTube standards. I think I'm allowed to say Soviet people. Someone has an expression on their face that means they look Soviet. Hopefully, yes. I hope I haven't broken any rules by saying that. So I don't know. That one's like 3, not that high. But what are the ones around it? Are they all a 3? Should we give marks for these little ones? I don't know. All these eerie footage shows abandoned Russian military camp. Why Putin wants Donbass? Informational. Ukraine's ravaged heartlands. That's quite strong. My teeth are starting to spoil. Something about children suffering Russian bombardment and hiding from Russian bombardment. My teeth are starting to spoil. And again, guys, man, war's negative. When I see that, I just remember the dead bodies of children and women I saw from the Arabic. I don't know if they were newspapers because I didn't know Arabic that well, but it's just kind of this kind of, well, if your teeth are okay and they're still attached to your body, it's kind of positive. Okay, but anyway, I wish everyone health, like all those children that are down there. I hope they don't end up like the other ones. You know, I really do. It's just a nightmare to see that type of stuff. So, all in all, I think overall, you know, 65 for the main picture, but not a lot added to around it. And I think this system's working quite well. And then the kind of distractors, like, there's one there again about China. It's like, what's going on, America? It's Fox News did have something in one of the times we looked at it was all about local stuff, but this one's really, you know, hunger and anger, and Shanghai's unending lockdown nightmare. It's a lockdown nightmare, yeah. See, I mean, people aren't dying. That's why I can laugh about this one. It's just beautiful language. Hunger and anger. Look, there it is. There it is. There's hunger and anger. There are people lining up to have like a COVID test done, but it's hunger and anger, guys. Do you really see a reflection? I don't know. Do you see a reflection of hunger and anger on these pieces of people's faces, or are they queuing patiently for something? So the picture would be 0. Maybe the hazmat suit, you know, it makes you think about World War III or something. But yeah, you can see here that it's generating some negativity away from the Russia-Ukraine situation. Death toll raises questions outside China. Law official raises questions, suspicion, raises questions about China. Lockdowns cast pall. This is beautiful language, guys. This is beautiful. Like, if you're ever going to try and write negative things, you know, don't do it about China. You know, people just write negative things about China all the time. Lockdowns cast pall over China's economy. Like, that just sounds so negative. Like, cast some pall over China's economy. Whatever you do, don't go away and Google any statistics about Chinese economic growth, because you may then wonder why they're using cast pall. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's going to drop 30% this quarter. I'm not sure. We'll wait and see. Okay, and then interesting enough, I just thought I began with this, and I'll finish the CNN analysis with this one. We've got Jennifer Aniston's Insomnia, just her latest sleep issue. And for me, this is always quite interesting. Like, you kind of hop from, like, Donbass assault begins as Ukrainians make last stand. You know, this kind of last stand, impending death, fleeing from Russia, children worrying about their teeth. And then you come back down and you've got Jennifer Aniston's Insomnia. is just her latest sleep issue. This kind of contrast of stories right next to each other is kind of weird. Maybe it's an advertisement. Is that just a kind of advertisement for me? Cool, so that's it. So we've got 65, and then around that I just say it's, that Shanghai one, I'm going to say that Shanghai one takes away from the negativity around the Russia-Ukraine situation. So I'm going to say like 65 plus 3 minus 3, but plus 2 for the negative news underneath that. So that's 67. So I've now entered it into our data. You can see it's progressive, it's US, and it's 67. So both times I've looked at it, analyzed CNN, it's been quite high. If we have a look at the conservative equivalent that I looked at, Fox News, it really swung. If it was about Ukraine, it was just everywhere. Perhaps because there was a major war incident, I'm not sure. But looking at the headlines today, it sounds like, impending impending attack on an area, another area starting to go. But yeah, interesting stuff. Interesting that they're a little bit more consistent with their highly emotional state in reference to that. And particularly if we look at the Chinese one, that's also negative. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. Okay, we'll look at the Toronto Star. I haven't focused in well because I just wanted to quickly think about, okay, what's it going to look like? And if we look at Canada, it was a bit higher with the progressives, a bit lower with the conservatives last time, but they weren't very high scores. There hasn't been a focus in the Canadian newspapers for a little while. And so what do you think? Do you think there'll be a bigger focus, as big a focus as in the American ones, or not much of a focus? And if we go scrolling over Toronto Star at the top, I'll just make that a bit smaller, zoom out. We can see that the main news there is about its growth upon growth. Wow. See, it's rising despite cooling market. That's weird. It's rising despite the cooling market. Very interesting. Okay, so big problems with real estate for Canadians, affordability, and then nothing around that. Ontario, 60%, ready to fight. Okay, good. We've got, well, good. It's not good. Sorry, guys. Got to be careful here. Ready to fight to the last drop of blood. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. So we don't have a picture, so it gets a 0 for the picture element. This is not going to rate high. Because even though there's language here in the article, the title is quite emotional, it just doesn't attract your attention. Business, world, and I don't know if like people in Canada or Ontario, wherever this is, are like Sydney-siders. Real estate, boom, you focus on the real estate. Okay, but ready to fight to the last drop of blood. Well, that's emotional. That's emotional. Let's have a quick look. Ready to fight to the last drop of blood. That's definitely between 5 and 10 for me, but maybe not for you. Maybe because like fighting, if it's been between soldiers, I don't get emotional. I don't know. It depends on you. What do you think about that? Ready to fight to the last drop of blood. Does that make you feel very sad? Does it make you feel a little bit sad? Does it make you feel incredibly sad? And then the language again is highly descriptive. I think it's like one of the conservative newspapers, the Canadian conservative one, had these wonderfully complex structures, very sophisticated. But what we can see here is some really emotional and picturesque, vivid language as Russia looms over, like Russia, that's just beautiful. Russia looms over eastern Ukraine. Canadians, and this is where it comes home a bit more emotional for the reader. Canadians are said to be good reporting language, very, very sophisticated reporting language we see here, are said to be among surrounded Mariupol fighters. Surrounded Mariupol fighters. So that's a bit of information. Mariupol fighters. We know that there's some fighters surrounded in Mariupol. Okay, so that one there, I'd probably give it, I don't know, ready, last drop, looms over, surrounded. I'll give it a 7. It's all pretty strong. But it doesn't get multiplied because it's not that focus picture. It's not the biggest headline there next to the focus picture. And so we have to go through a bit. We have to process other information to get to this one. And so our brain's more likely to be in a real estate state, whatever that is. Okay, so that one is a 7. Okay, I didn't look at the conservative. You can see I've put in the 7. There's progressive, left-leaning, Canadian. Row 4. I've put in a 7 there, and I suppose the equivalent would have been the Sydney Morning Herald. Again, I can't remember if that's left or right, but I looked at 3 for conservative. I said the Sydney Morning Herald was conservative. I gave it a 0. There wasn't anything there. So a 7. So yeah, it's kind of looking a little bit like Canada, 7. It's generally lower. Here it was 4 when I was looking at the distance. Australia was 0 and 0. US 15, but then 55, 67, 0, 80. A lot of the big scores. If we get rid of like the low liars, like the 0, US is pretty big. England was 71 initially when I was looking at the geographic distance. And minus 20 on a really funny day when they were just showing positive stuff for some reason. It was like the wedding, like a young couple getting married, and Kiev was blooming. Kiev was blooming. I remember that metaphor. See, that's the power of metaphor. If you use a metaphor, our brains remember it much better because it's picturesque. So I really advise you to try and use more metaphors in your life. I'm trying to think of a metaphor to advise you to use metaphors, but nothing's happening. So I'm going to stop and get on with the video. Okay, what's the last one then? We're going to look at the English one. So we had plus 30 for the Conservative, reasonably emotional. Nothing compared to the Fox News there, but reasonably emotional there. What about the progressive English newspaper, The Guardian? What do you think that's going to be? It's definitely not going to be minus 20. Will it be as strong as the Conservative one for that day? Will it be stronger or weaker than the Canadian from today, Progressive 7, and the American CNN from day 67? Let's have a look. Okay, so again, The Guardian with that really, really dominant picture. It really dominates the front. It's a scrolling picture that shows different things. And as we go down, obviously Russia, Ukraine, President of Ukraine, something Ukrainians, and Fiji. Interesting stuff. Oh no, Russian oligarch. Okay, that's written down there. Ukraine. Sorry, Fiji. I thought something was going to be about you guys once. Ukraine invasion in focus straight away. And then we come down and we've got Shanghai. And this is really interesting. Like, we saw the one about Shanghai in the American one. I'm sorry, guys. I know there's supposed to be Ukraine and Russia, but this is quite interesting. Shanghai prepares to ease lockdown as factories open. So that's all quite positive. Interesting, isn't it? That we've got such a positive view of Shanghai. If we were rating like China news, which I might go on to after hopefully, fingers crossed, the Russia-Ukraine war ends, and we get back to what you might call usual negativity on the front page, like geopolitical negativity. Yeah, interesting. Really stark contrast with that positive story about what's happening with COVID. And look, again, people lining up patiently, waiting, presumably to be tested, but they're outside in the sun. And that's worth thinking about. Here they are outside in the sun. It's quite happy, quite positive. With the one in the CNN article, you can see that inside it's shady. Maybe they're outside, but it's dark. It's got that basement type feeling because of all these pipes there. And so, yeah, that kind of matches this negativity. The focus in on the hazmat suit. Whereas the one in the Guardian about Shanghai, it's daylight. There's no one in a hazmat suit. It's kind of almost like they're just out there standing there to sunbake. And then, who knows? Maybe that's what Chinese people do. A lot of people don't know much about China. Maybe they just stand outside in the street all day and sunbake like that. Okay, but back to the main topic. And so we can see it is dominated. The Guardian is dominated by the Russia-Ukraine war, and we can expect a fairly high mark. This is one of those interesting ones. This is what I call where there's smoke, there's fire. And so there's a big focus on the smoke. And that generally tends to create negativity in us, like in smoke, danger, danger, smoke, danger. But again, we've got the sun shining here. And that building is definitely intact. And those buildings there look to be intact. Let's zoom in a little bit. Yeah, it's kind of everything's okay. It seems to be kind of smoke off in the distance. And like as a Sydney sider, someone from Australia, you can kind of imagine that there's a bushfire over there. That's very, very black smoke. Again, I'm not an expert on this. This would be quite interesting to talk with an expert on signs of war damage and the possible reasons for that. Like, why is this smoke so black? What's on fire that makes it black? I guess it's some sort of chemical, some sort of petrol thing that's been hit. And that's what's producing those dark, dark clouds. It'd be really interesting to know about that. But yeah, that is from Lvov. Yeah, and it's interesting. It's about the main title is about Donbass. But they're showing pictures from Lvov, which is from a couple of days ago. And one of the rolling pictures was also about Mariupol, which was from a few days ago. So it's interesting to see that they're using pictures that were the focus picture from a few days ago. But the title itself is changing, like Capture Eastern City. Russian troops capture Eastern City. That's quite interesting. That's like, first of all, the picture. I don't know, guys. When I see so many intact buildings and something off in the distance, as an Australian, I just think, okay, it's a bushfire. So, like, it doesn't make me emotional at all. Like, I'd give it like a 1. But, you might think like, oh, this is horrible. There's smoke. That means people are dying. That might be association of seeing smoke in the distance. But yeah, it's not mine. So, obviously feel free if it's making you feel like a reptile, give it a 10, no problem in the world. But yeah, I'd give that a 1. we come up here, we've got this live thing that the Guardian's got going, and I had a look at the other day. It's interesting. They tend to just repeat the same statistic. It was about 5 civilians killed in a missile strike in Lvov, and it had that at the top, and then it didn't really give a lot of information about what was happening to civilians within the war. It was more about what different people were saying about it, which I kind of found interesting, like live, what's happening. It was more about live, what are people saying. And a statistic there, something like 350 separate rocket strikes from the Russian army against military targets across the Ukraine. And I just thought that was quite interesting. Like my friend who gave me the advice, looked at progressive and conservative, used a wonderful metaphor. What are newspapers shining the light on? And that's been one of the things that hasn't been shone on. Like the Russian army is in Ukraine, probably, I don't know, 100,000, I don't know how many, quite a lot. It's a sizable army there in the Ukraine. And we have seen news about strikes on civilians, nursing home problems, all these things. But in terms of the military, it really does seem there was a Russian ship that was sunk. There doesn't seem to have been a spotlight shone on anything that the Russian military has done against the Ukrainian military, which I think is I don't know if I'd call it interesting, but it is definitely a darkness, a lack of information that you would have if you've been reading, from what I've seen, these kind of newspapers like The Guardian and so on. So that's something also worth thinking about. What are people generally shining the light on? The Guardian's been showing smoke and destroyed buildings. The Chinese newspaper I looked at before was just showing political processes. The German newspaper, when I looked at it, had a mix of political processes and the burning buildings, or bombed out buildings. So it's a 1 there. Russian troops capture eastern city as Domran. Nah, that's a 5. You know, it's about war. It's going to be emotional. 6:30. I cannot call these people Ukrainians, pro-Russian collaborators. The battle for Donbass, Russian launches offensive. That's quite formal. So again, 5:35. Let's chuck it in. Okay, so I've punched it in there. 35 for the progressive one, The Guardian. And so we can see it's rounded up. It's at 42. 109 divided by 3 is what, about 36. So roughly speaking, it's averaged out at 36. 110 divided by 3 is about 36. But it's been definitely skewed. Yeah, in general, it seems to be chunked. Progressive ones seem to be chunked around that, quite emotional, whereas the conservative ones, they really go for it, or they don't do anything. Which is interesting, isn't it? So I don't know, guys. Honestly speaking, the conclusion I can draw after looking at the kilometers, like how does the distance away affect how emotional things are, looking at progressive and conservative, I've got my first initial conclusion, first initial tautology. But do you know the etymology of tautology? Yeah, you're a real philologist. You can make that mistake as long as you know the tautology, the etymology of tautology. Okay, I think what we can see is like the really high ones are coming in the US. For me, that's like the clearest thing, that there's a lot of emotion going on in the front page of US newspapers. Coming in second after the US, I'll give that a softer one, would be England. And generally speaking, things are a lot quieter from what I've seen: Canada, Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, Germany. So there's an interesting one. What is it that the US and England have in common? And I'm saying England, not Britain. Maybe I should say Britain. What is it the US and England, Britain have in common? Obviously, this is just kind of pure speculation, because it's not English, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. It's not distance. At first, I thought maybe it's something to do with nuclear weapons, and then I realized that France has nuclear weapons. But I might do that next time. Like, I'll do a nuclear weapon-powered front-page newspaper. Because unfortunately, the Syrian war and now this war can bring us closer to a possible nuclear catastrophe. But let's hope that can be avoided. Okay, guys. So on that happy note of the imminent end to organized human civilization, I think organized human existence. Wonderful quote by Noam Chomsky. Organized human existence is under threat because of nuclear war. What's it called? Climate change. You see, I've forgotten about that. It's nowhere. It was actually on one of the newspapers there, but it's not as prevalent as perhaps it should be. And I think there was a third thing. I think he said democracy in peril in different countries as well, as poses quite a threat. Okay, so on that happy note, guys, I'll say goodbye, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next Phil Fucker video.